Well, hello there. It's great to see you all again, and welcome back to another edition of the Ezra File. It's been a wee while since our last one. Where does time go to, eh? But anyway, we've got a session for you here today. It's a session for you, especially if you are an Anglican. It don't matter if you're not an Anglican; you're still welcome to watch it. But what we're going to look at today is particularly concerning for us who are Anglicans, because what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at this book and the process of which it is a part, living in love and faith. And those of you who are Anglicans may well recognise what it's all about. It's the Church of England's latest foray into the issue of human sexuality and the definition of marriage. But even if you're not an Anglican, these are issues that are batted around all church denominations these days. They are matters of some debate and contention. And as I say, this I'll call this LLF from now on. The whole LLF process, and there's a synodical organisational process that goes around that. That's what the Anglican Church is going to be doing and debating over the next few months in the autumn and into 2022 as well. I mean, you could argue, is this really the best time to be debating something like this if we're still in the middle of a pandemic? But anyway, the powers of be have said that's what we've got to do. So that's what we're going to do. So what I'd like to do is over the next few minutes is just to do a little bit of introduction for you. An introduction from my perspective, ultimately, an introduction to the whole LLF process and where it comes from, what lies behind it, and what I feel, at any rate, the issues are. As I've said, LLF is the latest foray of the Church of England into the whole area of human sexuality and the definition of marriage. It's part of a series of such forays, I should say. We can go back to 1991 and this document here, Issues in Human Sexuality, a statement by the House of Bishops. This, for me, really is where it all kicks off, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. And then followed about just slightly over 10 years later by another publication from the House of Bishops in the Church of England, Some Issues in Human Sexuality, a Guide to the Debate, a discussion document from the House of Bishops group on issues in human sexuality, and you can see the way that these things are going. Look at how thick, or actually how thin, that is compared to that, and then down the line, look at how thick that is. There you go. But anyway, so what's all this about? How are we to understand LLF and the process that's been behind it and the issues that it raises? Well, I say, if you're an Anglican, you know that at things like PCC and Deanery Synod, Diocesan Synod, these issues will be discussed over the next few weeks and months. So here's my understanding. Here's my, I'd like to explain to you what the issues are, what the background is, and how I think we should approach this whole area. I'd like to do it by way of a parable. It's a parable involving mathematics. One of my sons, as you might know, is a maths teacher. I won't tell you which one. Names are withheld to protect the innocent. But anyway, let me borrow a little parable from the whole area of mathematics. I'd like you to imagine that you're a maths teacher. And in your maths class, you teach your children that a triangle is a shape with three sides, three vertices. A triangle is a shape with three sides. You do that because, well, that's what mathematics has always taught. Right, go back to the dawn of mathematics in ancient Greece, and they taught that a triangle is a shape with three sides. One of the fundamental assumptions that mathematicians have always made. And so in your class, you faithfully pass on what mathematics has always taught, that a triangle is a shape with three sides. But by and by, you suddenly hear of some mathematics teachers somewhere suddenly start teaching that a triangle doesn't have to have three sides. A triangle can have four sides or even five sides, and it's still a triangle. And you shake your head and you think, surely such a thing cannot be. It has never been so since the dawn of mathematics. A triangle is a shape with three sides, and that's the way it is. And so you go back to your day job and think that the whole madness will soon pass. But by and by, more people start to say that a triangle doesn't have to have three sides. It could have four sides or five sides. And even you hear some professors of mathematics in America have come to that conclusion. And they are teaching their students that a triangle is a shape that doesn't have to have 3 sides. It can have 4 sides or it can have 5 sides. And this worries you because the whole of your profession appears to be at stake here. What is going on? So you get a group of your colleagues together and you invite the professor of mathematics from Oxford and the professor of mathematics from Cambridge, and you get together and you make a study and you look at the issues and see what the answer is. And the answer is that a triangle is a shape with 3 sides. It always has been. It's been taught that way since the dawn of mathematics, and that is what corresponds to reality. A triangle is a shape with 3 sides. And you think, well, surely that will settle the matter now. All this will just go away. So I'll go back to my classroom and start teaching my class again. But by and by, you hear that more professors of mathematics in America are suddenly saying that a triangle can be a shape with more than 3 sides. And even 1 or 2 professors of mathematics in England are starting to join them. And so you think, well, let's get the meeting together again. Let's get the conference together again. Let's have a look at it all again and thrash the issues out. And so you invite your colleagues to a meeting, to a committee, to form a committee. Again, you invite the professor of mathematics from Oxford and the professor of mathematics from Cambridge, and you look at all the issues, you examine the matter from all sides, you hear what the alternatives are, and you come to your conclusion. And your conclusion is that a triangle is a shape with 3 sides, just like you decided way back when, and just as it's always been taught since the dawn of mathematics in ancient Greece. And you think, surely this will settle the matter. But no, yet more and more people, more and more professors of mathematics begin to say that a triangle is a shape that can have more than 3 sides. It can have 4 sides or 5 sides or 6 sides. And what we should do is instead rejoice in the diversity of understandings that we now have. And so, somewhat wearily, you invite your colleagues back to join another committee. You invite as many professors of mathematics as will come to your committee, and you study the matter again. And you look at the issue from all sides, and you consider all possible alternatives. And the committee comes up with the suggestion, the recommendation that we should rejoice in the diversity of our understanding. And instead of insisting that a triangle can only have 3 sides, we should all seek to live with one another's different insights about what a triangle is. Now, what do you do? But one thing you do notice, that wherever in a maths class it is taught that a triangle is a shape that can have more than 3 sides, suddenly the popularity of mathematics begins to decline. And you wonder, what is the future of my subject? Well, there you go. There's my little parable. And the parable does relate to the whole area of human sexuality, as the Anglican Church has been debating it for over 30 years now. And of course, in my parable, the first 2 committee meetings, the committee meetings that got together to come up with an answer that a triangle really is a shape with 3 sides, they correspond to these 2 documents, Issues in Human Sexuality and Some Issues in Human Sexuality. Some Issues in Human Sexuality was an attempt by the Church of England, by the House of Bishops, the professors of mathematics, to come together and to try and find an answer. What is the answer to the question of human sexuality? Is there anything? Is there a normative understanding of human sexuality? Does the Bible and the Christian tradition teach something that can be understood as normative? And their conclusion back in 1991 is yes, it most certainly does. Let me read to you from this from the statement. It's section 2.29. It says this: there is in Scripture an evolving convergence of the ideal of lifelong monogamous heterosexual union as the setting intended by God for the proper development of men and women as sexual beings. Sexual activity of any kind outside marriage comes to be seen as sinful, and homosexual practice as especially dishonorable. It is also recognized that God may call some to celibacy for particular service in his cause. Only by living within these boundaries are Christians to achieve that holiness which is pleasing to God. A triangle is a shape with three sides. And 10 years down the line, a wee bit more than 10 years down the line, the second conference that you convene with your colleagues and the professors of mathematics, that corresponds to this, Some Issues in Human Sexuality, which was again an attempt by the House of Bishops, after quite a bit of consideration, to come up with an answer. Is there a normative understanding of human sexuality? And their conclusion was there is, and it's the same conclusion. They quote the conclusion from 1991. They quote it here in Some Issues in Human Sexuality. I'll read to you the passage. It's page 167, 4.5.1 and following. In this chapter, we've reviewed the biblical material that shaped the approach of the Christian tradition to homosexuality. In the light of this review, it would seem that while there is room for a legitimate debate about the interpretation of the text concerned, and while some of the texts address issues that are not directly relevant to the current debate, nevertheless, the hermeneutical principles set out in chapter 2 and the consensus of biblical scholarship still point us in the direction of the church's traditional reading of the biblical material. And then they go on to quote 2.29 from here. So that's these two are an attempt, whatever you might think of the attempt, they are an attempt to find an answer to the question. LLF, by contrast, corresponds to the third get-together in my little parable. LLF, if you read it, is not really an attempt to find an answer. It's an attempt to live with diverse understandings. Just like the last conference in my parable, people were encouraged to live with one another's different definitions of a triangle. A triangle is a shape that can have 3 sides or 4 sides or 5 sides. Let's just live with the diversity. And that's pretty clear. It's pretty clear to me from the get-go in LLF, the LLF book. LLF begins by looking at John chapter 6, which is the feeding of the 5,000 in John's Gospel. And what it tries to say to us that in John chapter 6, as Jesus feeds the 5,000, the disciples come and they sit down, they bring what they have and they sit down. They all sit down together and they each receive from Jesus what he gives them. And that is meant to tell us that what we should do is sit down together with our different understandings and learn what we can from one another and see how we can get on with one another. And you can look at page 3. I'll read to you a paragraph from page 3, which is the summing up of this understanding of the feeding of the 5,000 in John's Gospel. So it may be that, like the disciples, you can't see the sense of getting everyone to sit down. And yet, this book is an invitation to do that, to sit down, to learn, to listen, and to pray together. This is neither easy nor comfortable, and it is a step of love and faith. When Jesus ordered the disciples to make the crowd sit down, they had no evidence that everyone would be fed. In fact, quite the contrary. In the same way, this book offers no recommendations or guarantees of an agreed way forward for the church in the relation to human identity, sexuality, relationships, and marriage. But it does challenge all of us to believe that God is at work among us as we sit together and learn, to study, to listen, to talk, and to receive. And in so doing, to follow Christ together in his way, truth, and life. Let's all just sit down together with our diverse understandings, see if we can learn. I actually find that quite an unsatisfactory way of approaching the matter, not least because I think it's an actual misuse of John chapter 6. If you look at John chapter 6, the feeding of the 5,000, if you read what the climax of that story is, the climax of that story is that a division appears. Some people walk completely away from Jesus, whereas others, they come to him and they say to him, you have the words of eternal life. We are following you. So in John's gospel, the feeding of the 5,000 is not Jesus getting people together and live together with diverse understandings. Actually, it's the complete opposite. It forces a division. It asks people where they stand and who will follow and who will walk away. In other words, we cannot avoid the issue of what is right, what is true, what the answer is. But anyway, that's what we have to do. We have to look at the whole area of human sexuality. We have to follow the LLF process. That's what we committed to do. That's what the Anglican Church has asked its various members and its various churches and parishes to do over the next few weeks and months. But where will it all lead to? Well, let me go back to that parable. Where might it lead to, rather, if we accept the invitation of LLF? Where's it all going? Where might it lead to? Well, let's go back to that parable. The maths teacher, you're that maths teacher, and at the end of the whole thing, when the committee has said we've got to learn to live with the diversity, that a triangle can have more than three sides, and the last thing that the maths teacher noticed was that wherever that was taught, mathematics went into decline. It ceased to be popular. The numbers of people studying it went down and down and down. And actually, we know that a similar thing happens in the Anglican Church, where the ideas of sexual diversity take root. We know what happens because we can see it. I used America as a kind of an example in my parable. Well, churches in America, in North America, and in Canada have gone down the avenue of saying that we can live with a diversity of understandings of human sexuality. We want to live with a diverse understanding of what marriage is. And all you see there is bitterness, decline, and division. Why would anyone want to choose that pathway? For me, just as a triangle is a shape that can only have three sides, so is human sexuality and the definition of marriage to be between a man and a woman. Be seeing you.